There's a new controversy over government surveillance, planes in American airspace, a controversy fueled by a recent piece on BuzzFeed News and sourced widely. Who's being targeted by the spies in the sky and why? And what does it mean for your security? Let's go ahead and talk about this with Nathan Wessler. He's staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union, who works on the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. Nathan joins me from New York. Nathan, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So just exactly what is going on here based on your research and based on what you've read and what you've been able to uncover?
Yeah, so we now know that the FBI, as well as other federal law enforcement agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Marshal Service, and others, maintain large fleets of airplanes that they use for aerial surveillance over U.S. cities and the rest of the country. The ACLU uncovered some of these records in our investigation of surveillance flights by the FBI over Baltimore during the protests following the killing of Freddie Gray. There was excellent reporting by the Associated Press starting to dig into just how many of these planes the FBI has and how they're registered to front companies with P.O. boxes all over the country. And then this excellent BuzzFeed investigation gave us a real deep look into the frequency of these flights, where in the country they're operating, and how widespread their use is.
And what is the common explanation that we've been hearing from the government? Are they looking after terrorists? Are they looking after the drug cartels and human trafficking, or just your average run-of-the-mill criminal? Who are they going after with these?
Well, the FBI told BuzzFeed that they are focused on counterintelligence and counterterrorism operations. The Department of Homeland Security suggested that it's mostly border security and drug investigations. But it doesn't really bear out that those are the only kinds of investigations they're using these flights for. One of the interesting findings of BuzzFeed's investigation was that the flights basically disappear on the weekends. This is a 9-to-5 weekday kind of a job, which suggests that these are not just being used in high-priority national security type investigations, because we would expect those to be operating all the time as needed. This really suggests that, as with all other kinds of government surveillance technologies and techniques that we and others have uncovered over recent years, they are being used for all kinds of investigations. And that's certainly what the ACLU saw when we obtained records from the federal government about flights over Baltimore during the Freddie Gray protests. That was not some kind of a national security operation. There were large numbers of protesters in the streets. There were also some people engaging in what could be called looting and some criminal activity. But it was not a national security operation, but they were deploying planes in about 10 flights over the course of 5 days over a small area of West Baltimore.
We've seen some reports that say that the government can also tap into your phone conversations from these planes when they're flying over you. I know if they did that to me, they'd get a bunch of dropped calls. What are you hearing about that?
Well, we know that law enforcement agencies across the country at the local, state, and federal level have been more and more heavily relying on devices that are known as cell site simulators. They're also called stingrays or dirt boxes. And these are devices that mimic a cell phone tower and send out a signal that forces every other phone in the area, including all the bystanders' phones, to transmit back their unique identifying information. And then by virtue of those transmissions, these devices can very precisely locate phones. We've known for a long time that they're used in police cars and carried by hand. And we've learned recently that they're also mounted on aircraft. We know the FBI uses them, although the FBI says it hasn't used them very much. We know that the U.S. Marshal Service has used them a large number of times in flights over dozens of U.S. cities.
Talk to me about the aircraft themselves. Are these government-operated planes, or are they contracting this out to the private sector? If so, who?
Well, it appears that they're government operated, but they're registered to what seem to be front companies, companies with names like NG Research, registered to P.O. boxes in places like Manassas, Virginia, Bristow, Virginia, places near small regional airports that have access to large metropolitan areas. But it seems to be, as far as we can tell, actual government employees, FBI agents, Department of Homeland Security officials, who are flying the planes and operating the surveillance gear on board.
What's been the reaction from Congress to this story?
Some members of Congress have been asking questions, trying to figure out what the legal standard is that governs these flights, certainly whether cell site simulators have been used, And it was pursuant to a letter from some members of Congress that we learned the FBI's estimate of the number of times it had used those devices on airplanes. So these are still early days in learning the full scope of these aerial surveillance programs, but certainly it's caught the attention of lawmakers.
Do you think there needs to be action from Congress or some sort of government investigation to find out just exactly how often these planes are in the sky and what type of information that they've been able to obtain? Because when you're relying on various apps or you're relying on news organizations to find things out, sometimes you don't have the complete and whole story. Do you expect to see that?
We certainly should see that. We hope to see that. This is a story that plays out time and time again with invasive government surveillance. By the time the public learns what's been going on through the work of civil liberties organizations or the press, the surveillance techniques have been in use for years, have been deployed widely. That certainly is what has happened here. As we know, these planes are carrying infrared cameras, sophisticated augmented reality systems, and in some cases, these cell site simulators. Really, what we should have had all the time, and what I would hope to see now, is consistent reporting from federal agencies themselves about the number of times they use this technology, about the kinds of technology on board the planes, how many flights, et cetera. And then investigations by inspectors general or by congressional committees to look into whether those deployments were actually lawful, and even if lawful, whether they were justified and wise.
How many surprises do you think we'd find if we started combing through these records?
Well, it is hard to know, but a consistent story with government surveillance is that over and over, programs that are lauded as necessary for national security, as highly constrained and lawful, turn out to have been deployed in an overbroad manner to be used to investigate low-level or run-of-the-mill crimes. And I would expect that this tells a similar story once we get all the information.
What types of low-level crimes do you think that they would green-light these planes for? Because they have to be pretty expensive. I could see maybe, I don't know, if there's an IRS case, or maybe if there's a government contractor that has a workman's comp case and they want information on it. I guess the sky is the limit, but how low-level and how petty do you think that we could be, cases that we could see here?
It's really hard to know. Most of these cases are going to have a federal nexus. Most state and local law enforcement agencies, as far as we know, are not maintaining their own fleets of planes, although certainly larger agencies, maybe agencies on the order of the Los Angeles Police Department or the NYPD, can engage in their own aerial surveillance. So these would be mostly crimes with some kind of federal component, but that can include lots of drug crimes. And in this country, we're engaged in a pretty robust debate about how best to enforce the nation's drug laws and when is enough enough. When are we spending too many resources trying to lock people up who have only a small part in some of these drug enterprises?
All right, Nathan, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much.